Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hello. I'm back with Sarah. Sarah Baillie is here. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
This is the second part of a longer episode that we decided to break into two segments because we're trying to keep our conversations a little shorter. And so the last episode, we were talking about sort of the place that most women find themselves in midlife, kind of in their middle to late 40s, usually, where they're, as Sarah explained, they're at the bottom of this U curve. So picture an actual U, and it's like, the top of the U on the first side of the U is you as a kid, and then you descend down the U, and this is sort of the U is a reflection of sort of your personal satisfaction and happiness. And so you descend down the U, and at the bottom of the U, that's very often where we find ourselves statistically. It is pretty clear that we are at our unhappiest when we're in our mid 40s. And then we come up the other side of the U as we continue to age. And so we're talking about, last session, we were sort of talking about why we end up in the bottom of the U. And today we're really talking about how to start getting yourself back out of it. So we gave some strategies in the last session about how to start consciously working on doing less and caring less and taking a hard look at the parts of your life that actually are not fun for you and are draining you of energy, and the parts that are more enjoyable for you, and starting to work on shifting that balance. And today we're going to talk about, once you started doing that and maybe created some space for yourself, now you probably have the capacity, which is Sarah's favorite word, the capacity to start thinking about what you really want going forward and who you are now, because you are not who you were when you were 17.
Yeah.
Down there, deep in your core, it's the same person, but some stuff has changed, and you're allowed to change what you want, and you're allowed to change the things that matter. Like, you can do that. And I think a lot of us feel like we can't, we're sort of constrained in this model, but this is the beauty of midlife. This is the amazingness of being on the other side of the U. It's that you get to decide all of it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
I talk about this time of life as being the equivalent of puberty, really, in that puberty is a real time of individuation and self-actualization, trying to figure out who you are and who you're going to be in the next phase of your life. And this phase, this midlife phase, is also like puberty, but it's puberty with wisdom. So you've learned a lot, you've gained a lot, and you get to choose again how you're going to manifest yourself in this next phase of your life. And it's actually super, super exciting. It's hard to see it at the bottom of the U, that there's actually a way out, but that's the exciting part for me. I mean, that's the part that really we've been talking about for these last couple of years.
Yeah. And this is what we both love to coach around more than anything, really. Like this piece of it is watching the transformations for women on the other side of the U. It's very cool. And so this is really the time when you have to take responsibility for your own life. And that is tough. We talked a little bit about that in the first part of this episode. It can be really, really tough to take that objective look at your life and do that sort of tallying of all the things that you do, make the list of all of that, and realize, oh my gosh, so many of these things are not lighting me up. Maybe they never did. Maybe they did for a while, but they're not anymore. And they feel like chores, and I'm resentful of some of these things or all of these things. And then I just have this very, very short list of things that bring me joy. I mean, I have worked with women who have nothing on that list. So I just want to say that it's okay. That's okay if that's where you are. We're going to help you today figure out how to start building that list again for yourself. But this is the place where I always say to my clients, no one is coming. No one is going to do this for you. This is the difference, I think, between puberty
Right.
And midlife is that in puberty, you still have people who can help shepherd you and guide you through this. When you're in midlife, it's all on you, babe. Like no one's coming. And so this is the time to stand in that personal responsibility and recognize that where you are is not your fault, but it's now your responsibility in terms of if you're not happy, if you're not satisfied, if you're not feeling fulfilled, you get to feel all those things, but it's only going to happen if you decide that you're going to take action. Yeah. And it requires some work. It requires a lot of experimentation. It's probably going to require some disappointment and some false starts. And that's okay. You have the time for that now. And this is why my word for this year, for anyone who listened to the episode with Mary Byers that aired in the fall of 2022, my word for the year was agency, because that word has just been resonating with me since my kids left home. And I actually, so much so that my coach, who I work with, because I think all coaches need to work with coaches, because we're all constantly growing. My coach sent me a definition of this that I really, really love. I'm going to read it just because I would love for people listening to ask themselves whether agency might be the thing that they can get excited about, because you really do get agency if you have kids, once your kids are gone, or once you move through perimenopause and into menopause, and you've reached that, all those levels of success that you were hoping for in all the areas of your life, then you really can step into agency. And so the definition is: a sense of agency is a subjective measure that determines the degree to which you feel you have control over your mind, body, and environment. In many ways, it's your ability to take action and be effective, assume responsibility for your behavior, and influence your own life. According to psychologists, having a strong sense of agency is one of the most important traits to being happy. No matter how much material goods a person owns, you won't be happy if you don't have control over your actions and environment. A billionaire in prison is proof of this point. Knowing this, achieving a high sense of agency is one of the most important things you can do for yourself and those you care about. Strive for it. I really like that last part, those you care about. I think it's easy to assume that this energy that you might want to put into like self-fulfillment is somehow costing the other people in your life because it's selfish, but it's not. It pays off. I mean, I've had my husband and my kids comment on how happy I am. And someone asked me the other day, whose kids are still at home, asked me what it's like to be an empty nester. And I didn't even skip a beat. I said, it's great, which will surprise people who listened to me last year on the podcast, lamenting about this and grieving this, change that was happening. So agency is my word. I'm going to encourage you to think about your word. And it might be agency, it might be something else, but you get to decide how you feel for the rest of your life, and you get to decide how you spend your time and who you spend it with for the rest of your life. And to me, that's the agency. It's that I have that choice every day, what I decide to do. Okay, so no one's coming. We need to stand in personal responsibility in order to get more of what I need. So the next question, Sarah, is how do people figure out what that is?
Yeah. How do people figure out what it is? That feels like the biggest.
It's the biggest question. Yeah.
It's the biggest question.
Yeah.
So when people are contemplating, or, let's just go back to that. Ask me that question again.
Well, how do people figure out what that is when they realize they want something different, they need something different, they want something more? A lot of women are feeling like, I don't have any idea. Like people say that to me all the time in coaching sessions. I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know what I need more of. They usually have a vague feeling that there's something missing, but they can't put their finger on it. And then there's that whole thing where it looks like they have all the things that should make them happy, right? Yeah. So how do we go about figuring out what we need more of?
Well, one of the ways to do that is to try and remember a time when you did feel like you had more, not more things, but more of that feeling of fulfillment. And to remember what it felt like in your body to feel that, to remember, to go to a place, to go to a memory where you remember feeling that level of joy. In CTI, they call it like a peak experience of your life, like going to that place and creating the space to go there and being quiet and remembering what it felt like, who was there, what were you feeling, what were you doing, where did you feel it in your body? Often I describe that as like, I feel an opening in my chest, like I can breathe more, and try and explore, like try and wake up that feeling in your body again, so that you can remember what it feels like. And then to look at that feeling and ask yourself the questions, where in my life do I have this now? Where could I find this? What's the instinct of what comes up for me? For me, it might be like, I feel that when I'm swimming in a lake. Okay, how can I take steps to get into a lake? How can I take steps to go and find that feeling again for me? And so I feel like there's a lot of body experience involved in trying to quiet the mind, which says, I don't know, I'm freaking out, I don't know what I want to do. It's very logical. It's saying there's lots of things getting in the way of, I'd like to open a restaurant, but I can't because I don't have the money, or I don't have the time. Like there's a lot of discussion that happens in the head around that. If you take it out of that and you try and get into the body and try and remember and wake up what that sensation is like, you can actually find what it feels like to feel that joy and satisfaction and fulfillment. And then from that feeling, you can move forward into trying to figure out what might feel that way. What could you do in your life to replicate that feeling again?
Yeah, I think that's a really great place to start. And along those same lines, I would say, take some notes and write down as well. So you do the body sort of somatic side of it, and then you do the really more of the like factual side of it. So where was I? What year was it? Where was I living? Who was I with? Who did I see regularly? How much time did I have to myself? What was I doing for fun? What were some of the activities? What was the work I was doing? Or, did I have a dog? Did I not have a dog? Was I living in the city? Was I living in the country? Write all of that stuff down, because those things can be really good clues too, as to maybe where you can start experimenting, and I'm not saying like pack everything up and move to the country, but you can, for example, spend more time out in the country if that's something that, that time in your life you felt really, really great. So I'll get my clients we'll do peak experience after peak experience. So we don't just do that exercise once in a coaching program. We'll often do that 2 or 3 times. And from that, we'll be able to gather not only some details around the types of things that lit them up, have traditionally lit them up that may not be there anymore, but also we can gather some information around what was not there that's there in their life now that might be contributing to them feeling the way they're feeling. So that's another piece of this. It's not just what was there that made me feel that way. It's what wasn't there that's present now in my life that might be contributing to the way I'm feeling. So I think that's a really, really useful exercise, and everybody who's listening can do that. It's really just think of a time in your life when it felt like everything was exactly the way it should be, and you just felt really, really great. And you might have to dial it all the way back to before you had kids, before you had a job, before you were in a relationship. You might go back to childhood. What was happening then, and how can you get more of that in your life? And this is often what leads my clients to the hobby or the pastime. We talk a lot, you and I talk a lot about the joy of wasting time, and time that you lose where you're doing something and it's so pleasurable for you that you just forget you forget about everything else, which is so helpful when it comes to managing stress and pulling you out of fight or flight and all of that. This tool, this coaching exercise, is often the thing that gives us the clue as to what they should start trying. It's very often something creative. I mean, this is my experience in clinically working with people. The data that I've gathered is that the thing that's missing most often for women is something creative. There's no space for that. For most of us, when we're just taking care of everything, also trying to build a business, also trying to, do all of the things, not build a business necessarily, build a career. And there's just no space for that. So that's very often it. So that's a good place to start. If you're really struggling with this, what did I used to do creatively? Now that can mean a million different things, right, Sarah?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like talk about that, what that can mean.
Well, I think that a lot of people get stuck when you say creativity because they think they're not creative. I'm not artistic. That's generally the answer that I get back. And creativity for me can be anything. It can be, it's really the intention that's applied to it. So you could be creative in your love of cooking. You could be creative as in your love of sewing. You could be creative in the way that you decorate your house. Yeah. You could be creative in, I even find I'm a real novel reader, as you know, and so for me, reading novels instead of reading factual books or fiction or nonfiction it's a process of creativity. It activates my imagination. Right. And so that is important for me to be able to lose myself in that creativity of being with those characters. Creativity can be taking a walk in nature and trying to using your creative mind to be present to the life around you. It really can be anything. It's just it's the intention that's applied to it. And so I think I'd like to have another word for creativity actually, because I find that it sets up a mental block sometimes.
It does. I think for a lot of the women that I work with, it actually shows up in work.
In work too, yeah.
It could be like, and when I think about my own experience, I mean, obviously there's the writing piece, which is I talked ad nauseum about on this podcast. But the other thing that really happened for me in midlife is that I really started getting creative with my business, because I really started to stand in that same personal responsibility. I was like, no one's coming. If I want to change what I do every day, all day, if I want to, build something, community, whatever, I have to do that myself. And so creativity for me really showed up there in the, obviously this podcast. I mean, this was born out of menopause and midlife, this podcast, literally the first episode was because I went to see Sarah about hot flashes. So I think that's been a creative outlet for me. Has been doing this podcast, but also in the programming that I'm creating and in the niche that I serve, and moving into now this coaching coaches, which is just lights me up. I mean, you're in my program, you see me in there. I just absolutely love doing it, and I love creating the content and the programming that's interesting and exciting for new coaches and coaches that are trying to build their businesses. So that's something I'd never done that really before. Certainly not in a group way. I've been doing business coaching privately for a long time. So it can show up in business. And we see women who have always worked for, in quotes, the man, or hopefully the woman sometimes. And then they decide to go out on their own and start their own business of some sort in midlife, and just completely switch careers, or go back to school. All of those things are creative enterprises.
It's really about creation. So it's more so creativity implies, as I said, like the arts, but it's actually about creation. And so we've gone from this phase, if you just come back to that hormone piece, which I will always come back to, it's just like, so the hormonal years, whether you choose to procreate or not, they're about procreation. Now that those hormonal years, and as we're coming out of those, it's more about that creative energy is about us and about what we want to do. So it's like, there's another word. It's like not procreation, but recreation or rebirth.
I call it. I hate rebirth, but yeah. I picture like the Venus de Milo, except with gray hair and saggy boobs. Coming out of the shell, like the Venus coming out of the shell.
That's right.
That's my midlife. That's my midlife image.
But there is something about creation in there. There's something about that, and again, it's that individuation. It's that creation of something new. And so if that intention is behind your activity, then anything can be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. So creativity is probably a piece of it, but there are also probably some other pieces. I mean, for me, a really simple one, riding bikes.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that all the time when I was a kid, like most of us did. And then a little bit, I guess, in my adolescence and early adulthood, but then it sort of disappeared. And that's come back for me. That's something that I really enjoy doing. And we're looking forward to doing a lot of long rides this summer, my husband and I. So it can be something like that too. But you have to do this exercise and it is an exercise, it's work of actually trying to think back and figure out what are those things that at one point made me feel really good. Mm-hmm. And if you can't think of any, that's okay. You can just start experimenting and start with something. I suggest start with something that feels a little bit creative because, mm-hmm. and you might have to, I mean, everyone's heard my story of like how I got to writing, it started with the felting the lobster and somehow through a bunch of other stages ended up at writing, and first writing nonfiction and now writing fiction. So it's an evolutionary process. You're probably not going to land on exactly the right thing right away, but that's okay. I did enjoy felting the lobster. It wasn't a painful process. It just didn't, as I like to say, fill the gaping hole in my soul. It wasn't the thing. So another question that I ask my clients who are in this place is how, when you're looking back on this chapter of your life, and that what that is depends on how old they are and where they are in terms of life stage. But for a lot of my clients, they're nearing empty nesting, or they're there. And they're, contemplating retirement at some point. Maybe it's still 10 years or so off, but it's there, it's on the horizon. So I usually say like 20 years from now, when you're looking back on your life, how do you want to have gone through this chapter? What matters to you about how you spend the next 20 years? What matters, not just about what you do physically, but how you show up, and what needs to change in order for that to actualize, for that to become the way it is. And so that's it's a big question, mm-hmm. But it's a good question because at the age of 50, as you and I both know, suddenly things become finite. Mm-hmm. Suddenly your life becomes finite. I mean, everybody goes through that process of, just getting clear on the fact that life doesn't go on forever. And like I said, nobody's coming. It's up to us. How do we want to spend the next 20 years? What matters to you about how you go through that? And what do you want? Another good way to look at it, and this is a coaching exercise that I do sometimes, is, imagine now it's 20 years or 25 years into the future, and there's a big party for you. Maybe it's it's a retirement party, or it's a, special birthday party. And people are giving little speeches about you, and they're talking about you and what they love the most about you. What do you want people to say about how you lived this life? What is important to you about that? And here's the thing that's really interesting in this exercise, Sarah. It's never what you did.
Right.
It's never what you did. It's always who you were. Right. Yeah. We talk about this difference between like doing and being. But the things that people list when they do that coaching exercise are never like, oh, I want them to remember me as being a really hard worker, is always like showing up and getting the job done, or as being a great team leader. Like those are not the things. It's never work focused, what people put on that list. And that can be very eye-opening for people who are burnt out, women who are burnt out, especially, and who are staying in a career for a bunch of reasons, some of which are valid and some of which are probably feel very valid, but need to be tested, Mm-hmm. So it's just a really great exercise, because when you look at that list, you think, okay, now if I stay on the course that I'm on now, how likely is it that that's going to happen? And if I was to change the course I'm on now, how likely is it that that's going to happen?
Yeah. And I love the very simple questions. What do I have to say yes to in order to have more of that in my life? And what do I have to say no to?
Yeah.
It's not simply, what do I have to change? I really like to break that down into, What do I have to say yes to have this be the speech that's given at my 80th birthday party?
Yeah. And what do I need to say no to?
And what do I need to say no to?
Yeah. And because you can't say yes to the thing oftentimes until you've said no to the thing. And so you can make it a little less black and white by saying, what do I need to say yes to more often? And what do I need to say no to more often? If that feels really overwhelming to you and like it's forcing you to make some massive change, you can start with just, okay, what do I need to do more often in order to get closer to that place? Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how when you start doing that and you start trying to incorporate these things that might bring you more joy, that might light you up, that might leave you feeling more fulfilled, how doing those things gives you this drive to keep changing, to keep doing the things, but to get more of that stuff in and to start making, it's like, it gives you some confidence, like, oh, I actually can make the right decisions for myself. Oh, I actually do have agency. Oh, I actually can say no to something. Oh, I actually can say yes to something that serves me. And then it's amazing the momentum that you pick up. I see this all the time with the women that I work with, and I've certainly seen it in my own life. You just start saying yes to more things that serve you. I mean, look at you. You're a great example of that with the coaching. Just, there was a slow roll there at the beginning, and then it just really picked up momentum. And I see it playing out for you as your friend. I see it playing out for you in other areas. And I know you see the same thing happening for me. Mm-hmm. It's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you're climbing up the side of the U-bend quicker, just like it becomes easier. It's almost like it's pushing you forward, driving you forward up the other side.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't know how I can feel that much happier than I feel now. I mean, and this probably comes as a surprise to people who, again, listened to me last spring, lamenting and sad about the fact that my kids were leaving, but I feel really, really great. And I also, one of the reasons I guess I feel so good is because I know I did this. Mm-hmm. I made some changes. I have lots of things I'm looking forward to doing. And it's not like I'm finished by any means, but I really worked hard to be more satisfied and fulfilled and happier overall in my life. And it's working. So I'm here to tell you, you can get out of the U curve faster. You can get to that, because I wonder what the top of the U curve is age-wise. Do you remember on that actual?
No, I'm actually going to go back and look at it.
Yeah, we should. I think it's older though. I think it's more like 60s.
Yes, it's definitely in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. So, I think that's kind of cool. That's where I am. And I see it happening with the clients that I work with. So it's totally possible. So hopefully we've given you some things to think about here, between the last part of this episode and this part of this episode, in terms of like how to start carving out some more time for you, getting real, standing in personal responsibility around the second half of your life and what you want to do with it. And then how to figure out what that is and start going out and getting more of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
That's good.
Good. Okay.
I
feel satisfied too. Let's wrap this one up. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening. And by the way, if anyone's interested in working with Sarah, I'll put Sarah's contact information, her coaching information in the show notes of this podcast, so you can contact her that way. She's a fabulous,
it's on its way.
Fabulous coach, and she is building this part of her life in midlife. This is you standing in personal responsibility. Okay. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Bye, Sarah.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy, high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. If you've been putting yourself last for way too long and are worried that you're burning out, grab your free burnout checklist at www.wendymccallum.com/checklist. That's www.wendymccallum.com/checklist.